I'm Elsa Gilbertson, and I'm a Regional Historic Administrator with the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation. And we're here at the Chimney Point State Historic Site in Addison at the foot of the Lake Champlain Bridge on Lake Champlain. First known European to come into this area was Samuel de Champlain in 1609. He had been traveling all over to the north, and in 1609 he made his way south on what would be the lake that would be named after him, Lake Champlain. And this lake is the next largest lake in the United States after the Great Lakes. And so Samuel de Champlain came into this lake with two Frenchmen and some Native American allies. And he then did a lot of mapping, and soon on the maps you would see the name Lake Champlain or Lac de Champlain, so named after him. And he is especially known in this area for having a deadly encounter with the Iroquois, either this far south on the lake in the Crown Point area or further south. So Champlain really went over a lot of this area here, and he took a lot of notes because he was especially interested in the natural resources. And one of the big natural resources was the beaver. And Europeans used beaver pelts to make a felt that was perfect for fashionable hats for both men and women. And in Europe, the beavers had kind of all had been hunted, so there weren't many left. And so when they came to this area and saw that native peoples could hunt and trap these beavers, that was a great trading opportunity. And Champlain, he then wrote up all his travels and maps, and when this information got to Europe, both, especially the English and the French, were very excited about these natural resources, and they began coming to the area and interacting with the native peoples because they knew where everything was and what the resources were. So they had some mutually beneficial exchanges. So the Europeans brought guns and iron and cloth, and the natives adapted those materials to enhance their lives. And then in turn, they had a lot of traditions and skills that they had come up with in this area that the Europeans then adapted. So the Europeans started to make canoes, and they learned about snowshoes, and they had moccasins, and some of the food also was important to the Europeans who were in this area. So in the middle of the 1600s, the English were south of Chimney Point, and they'd kind of made it up as far north as the Albany, New York area. And the French, of course, were to the north in what is now Quebec. And both nationalities kept traveling up and down the lake. So right outside this building where we are, they would have been traveling up and down the lake. And they both considered this specific place, which the French called Point de la Chevelure, to be a very strategic location because it's so narrow here. And both sides were going to have a military base here, but that was kind of slow going on that. And in 1690, the English decided that they needed to watch the French on the lake here. So they sent up a Dutchman, Captain Jacobus de Varm, and 17 soldiers and 28 native allies here to keep a good watch on the French and to engage with them if they came around. And by the way, if they had any spare time, they should make some canoes. And this lasted for about a month, and then the English decided that they didn't really need to be here anymore, so they headed out again. By the early 1700s, the French had got word that the British were eyeing what is Chimney Point today, too, and they were getting a little alarmed because if the French let the English into the long, long lake, it would be very hard to get them out again. And so in 1731, the King of France, King Louis XV, agreed to plans to build a fort here at Chimney Point, and it was a fort de pieux, or a fort of logs, and it was built in the space of a couple of months, and there was inventory that was brought down from the King's Store in Montreal to build it and to supply it. And when the British got word that the French had built here, they were absolutely furious. But, the French got here first, so they could hold this position. And the inventories of the supplies that they brought are really interesting, because the first item on the list of the inventory is 1,100 needles, so sewing needles. So that meant that the French knew they were either going to trade with the native people, or they were going to give them gifts, or that kind of thing. So they had swivel guns here to go on the corners of the forts, and there was a bakery. And one of the fascinating things is that they brought window glass for their fort. So that's 1731. To have actual window glass in their building is pretty amazing for the time. And this glass was made in France, and it was shipped in barrels of molasses, because the molasses was like the packing material of the time. So the molasses came from the West Indies. It would have been shipped in barrels across the ocean to France, and then they packed the window panes in it so that it wouldn't break, and shipped them to Canada, and then to the King's Store in Montreal, and then they were brought down here. So there's some very tiny fragments of glass here that have been very well traveled. In 1735, the French decided that they needed a bigger fort, so they built one on the other side, and then the fort that was here was taken apart, and the debris brought over to what is now the New York side.
So right in here was the location, or is the location, of the chimney from the French fort. This was one of the most consequential finds of the archaeological excavations. It determined that there was indeed a distinctive French settlement here. This is likely the location of the fort. Some of the other barracks and other features we might have expected to find eluded us somewhat. But the chimney was definitive evidence of an early French occupation. Notably, there was also a feature, the remains of a fire hearth inside one portion of the H-shaped chimney, and within that was historic era Native American pottery, indicating that Native folks came and utilized the chimney as a temporary respite, likely a night or a few night camp, and utilized the existing French chimney after it had been abandoned in the late 1730s.
The King's officers in what's now Canada decided it would be great if they could encourage domestic settlement in this area, because then the people could make or grow a lot of food to then feed the soldiers. So they tried to have a domestic settlement start in the late 1730s. It didn't work out very well. So in 1743, it started again, and everybody got a long parcel of land, and then they would get a cow and a plow, and they could get their wheat ground over at the fort on the other side. And one of the interesting things with the food is that the first known cultivated apple trees in America, or Vermont anyway, were planted by the French, and they're called the fameuse, or the chimney apple nowadays. So there were lots of people living here then in this area, and they built houses and barns. And then as things are starting to heat up, and the English really would like this area, and so there was lots more troubles between the two nationalities who were in this area.